The security checkpoint at Naval Air Station Oceana hummed with its usual morning rhythm. Badge scanners beeped, turnstiles clicked, and the steady stream of personnel flowed through like clockwork. Dawn light filtered through the glass entrance, casting long shadows across the polished concrete floor. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Among the crowd, she moved with unremarkable efficiency. Dr. Lisa Morgan, according to the temporary contractor badge, swinging from a blue lanyard around her neck. Systems Integration Specialist, the badge read in small print. Nothing that would draw a second glance from the Marines manning the security station. She wore simple business casual navy slacks, white blouse, low heels that made no sound against the floor. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she carried herself with the kind of composed professionalism that suggested government contracts and PowerPoint presentations. Just another civilian consultant arriving for another day of telling military personnel how to do their jobs better. The young Marine at the scanner barely looked up as she approached. "Ma'am, please place your bag on the belt and step through the metal detector." "Of course," she replied, her voice calm and measured. She lifted her laptop bag with practiced ease, the motion fluid and controlled in a way that spoke of muscle memory, though the Marine was too busy checking the screen to notice. As she stepped through the detector, a faint glint caught the fluorescent light. A small section of black ink was visible just above the collar of her blouse, barely noticeable unless someone was looking directly at her neck. The Marine's eyes flicked up for a split second, but he was already waving her through, his attention moving to the next person in line. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories, and tell us in the comments where are you watching from today. Dr. Morgan collected her bag and walked toward the main administrative building, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. The morning air carried the familiar scent of jet fuel and salt water, and she paused for just a moment, breathing it in. Her expression didn't change, but something in her posture, a subtle straightening, a barely perceptible lift of the chin, suggested this wasn't her first time on a naval air station. The building's lobby buzzed with controlled activity. Officers moved with purpose between meetings, enlisted personnel carried folders and tablets, and the quiet hum of military efficiency filled the air. A receptionist looked up as she approached the main desk. "Dr. Morgan, you're here for the Naval Air Systems review?" "That's correct. I'm scheduled to meet with Commander Harrison at 0800. The receptionist checked her computer, then gestured toward a row of chairs near the elevator bank. "He's running about 10 minutes behind schedule. You're welcome to wait here, or there's coffee in the break room down the hall." Lisa nodded and chose a seat facing the main entrance, a habit so ingrained she didn't even think about it anymore. Always watch the exits. Always know who's coming and going. Always be ready. As she waited, she observed the flow of personnel around her with the kind of detailed attention that looked casual but missed nothing. The way the young ensign favored his left leg, recent injury, probably training related. The senior chief, who kept checking his watch late for something important, stressed about it. The commander, whose uniform was perfectly pressed but whose eyes showed the fatigue of too many 18-hour days. None of them paid her any attention. She was just another contractor, another civilian expert brought in to solve problems that the military apparently couldn't handle themselves. The dismissive glances and barely concealed eye rolls were so common she'd stopped noticing them years ago. What they didn't see was the way she cataloged every exit route, every potential threat, every tactical advantage in the room. They didn't notice how her hands remained loose but ready, or how her seated position allowed her to move in any direction without hesitation. They saw a systems analyst. She saw a battlefield. The elevator dinged softly, and Commander Harrison emerged, looking harried and carrying too many folders. He spotted her immediately. Civilians always stood out in military spaces and approached with the kind of forced politeness that suggested he had better things to do than babysit another consultant. "Dr. Morgan, sorry to keep you waiting." I'm Commander Harrison, project lead for the integration review. He extended his hand, and she shook it with a firm grip that made him pause for just a moment. Strong hands, calloused in places that didn't match her paperwork. Background. No problem at all, Commander. I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me. As they walked toward the elevator, Harrison made small talk about the base and the project timeline. Lisa responded appropriately, professionally, giving no indication that she knew more about naval air operations than most of his staff. Her questions were technical but not too technical, informed but not suspiciously so. The elevator carried them to the third floor, where the real work happened. Here, the corridors were lined with secure conference rooms and offices where classified projects lived and died. The security was tighter, the personnel more senior, the atmosphere more serious. Your temporary office is down this way, Harrison said, leading her past a series of closed doors marked with project code names and classification levels. You'll be working primarily with Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen. She's our lead systems engineer and knows the current architecture better than anyone. They stopped at a small office with a desk, computer terminal, and a stack of technical manuals. The window looked out over the flight line, where F-18 Hornets sat in neat rows like sleeping predators. Chen should be here any minute, Harrison continued, checking his watch. The morning briefing ran long budget discussions. You know how it is. Lisa smiled politely. She knew exactly how it was. She'd sat through more budget meetings than she cared to remember, back when she wore a uniform and had to justify every dollar spent on equipment that kept people alive in places the bean counters would never see. I'll get started reviewing the documentation while I wait, she said, settling into the chair and opening her laptop. The motion was smooth, practiced, and revealed another glimpse of the black ink at her collar, this time showing what might have been the edge of a wing or talon. Harrison nodded and left her to work, closing the door behind him. Finally alone, Lisa allowed herself a moment to drop the professional mask. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, and she turned to look out the window at the flight line. Somewhere out there, pilots were running pre-flight checks on aircraft that would carry them into harm's way, just like she used to do, in places where the enemy didn't announce themselves and the rules of engagement were more like gentle suggestions. A lifetime ago, when she answered to a different name and wore different insignia, she opened the first technical manual and began to read, but her mind wandered to the real reason she was here. The official story was systems integration, making sure new and old technologies could work together seamlessly. The unofficial story was more complicated, involving threats that couldn't be discussed in regular briefings and countermeasures that didn't exist in any manual. They thought they were getting a civilian contractor with a PhD in computer science. What they were really getting was something much more dangerous and much more necessary. But they didn't need to know that yet. The morning sun climbed higher, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across her desk. Outside, jets began their pre-flight routines, engines spinning up with the familiar whine that once meant home to her. Inside, Dr. Lisa Morgan reviewed technical specifications and integration protocols, playing her role perfectly. None of them suspected that the quiet woman in business casual had once been the nightmare that enemy combatants whispered about in languages they thought no one else understood. None of them knew that behind the professional demeanor and academic credentials was someone who had earned her reputation in places that didn't officially exist. That revelation would come soon enough, and when it did, everything would change. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen arrived 30 minutes later, looking frazzled and carrying an armload of printouts. She knocked once on the open door before entering, her expression already suggesting this meeting was just another item on an impossibly long to-do list. Dr. Morgan? Sorry I'm late. Budget meeting went sideways, and then the Admiral wanted updates on 3 different projects. She dropped into the chair across from the desk with the kind of exhausted sigh that spoke of too many 18-hour days. I'm Sarah Chen, and I'm guessing you're here to tell us everything we're doing wrong with our systems integration. Lisa looked up from the technical manual she'd been reading, offering a slight smile. Not exactly. I'm here to help identify potential vulnerabilities and improve interoperability between legacy and modern systems. Chen's expression didn't change. If anything, she looked more skeptical. Right. Let me guess, PhD from MIT, 10 years in the private sector, and a consulting fee that's probably more than my annual salary. Actually, University of Maryland, Lisa replied evenly. And the Navy's paying my firm, not me, personally. Same difference. Chen pulled out her own laptop and opened it with more force than necessary. Look, I'm sure you're very qualified, but I've been working on these systems for 8 years. I know every line of code, every hardware specification, and every workaround we've had to implement. What I don't need is some civilian contractor coming in and second-guessing decisions that were made for very good reasons. Lisa kept her expression neutral, but something flickered in her eyes just for a moment before disappearing behind the professional mask. I'm not here to second-guess anything. I'm here to help. Help? Chen's tone made it clear what she thought of that concept. You know what would help? More funding for proper hardware upgrades instead of Band-Aid software fixes. But since the Pentagon would rather pay consultants than invest in long-term solutions, here we are. The conversation was interrupted by voices in the hallway outside. 2 officers were passing by, their voices carrying through the partially open door. Another civilian expert who's never been closer to combat than a video game probably cost us more than replacing the whole system would have. Chen glanced toward the door, then back at Lisa with something that might have been embarrassment. Sorry about that. Nothing personal, but we get a lot of contractors who come in thinking they understand military operations because they've read some white papers. I understand the frustration, Lisa said quietly. And she did, more than Chen could possibly know. Why don't you walk me through the current architecture? Help me understand what you're working with. For the next hour, Chen explained the complex web of systems that kept the air station's operations running smoothly. Communications, networks, radar integration, weapons systems, maintenance tracking, all interconnected in ways that had evolved over decades of incremental upgrades and emergency fixes. Lisa listened intently, asking occasional questions that were informed but not too informed. She let Chen take the lead, expressing the kind of professional expertise that came from years of hands-on experience. But gradually, Lisa's questions became more pointed, more specific. The radar correlation algorithm you mentioned latency issues during high-traffic scenarios. Have you considered implementing a predictive buffering system? Chen paused mid-explanation. That's actually not a bad idea, but it would require significant processor overhead, and we're already running close to capacity during exercises. What if you use distributed processing? Split the workload across multiple nodes instead of trying to handle everything on the primary server. The security implications would be... Chen stopped, thinking. Actually, if we implemented proper encryption protocols and isolated the processing threads, that might work. The conversation continued, becoming more technical and collaborative. Chen's initial hostility began to fade as she realized that Lisa's questions weren't criticisms, but genuine attempts to understand the challenges they faced. More importantly, Lisa seemed to grasp the operational realities behind the technical decisions, something many consultants missed entirely. They were deep in discussion about network architecture when the door opened without a knock. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez entered with the kind of aggressive confidence that suggested he owned whatever space he occupied. He was built like a linebacker who'd stayed in shape, with thick arms and a chest that strained his khaki uniform. Chen, I need you to look at the maintenance tracking system. It's showing aircraft availability numbers that don't match our actual status board. His eyes flicked to Lisa dismissively. Who's the suit? This is Dr. Morgan, Chen said, her professional tone returning. She's here for the systems integration review. Rodriguez's expression soured. Great. Another civilian here to fix what isn't broken. He looked directly at Lisa, his voice taking on a condescending edge. Let me guess you've got theories about how we should be running operations based on some computer model you built? Lisa's posture didn't change, but something subtle shifted in her bearing. I'm here to assess interoperability between different systems and identify potential vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities. Rodriguez laughed, but there was no humor in it. Lady, the only vulnerability we have is civilians who think they understand military operations because they've got fancy degrees. You want to know about vulnerabilities? It's consultants who come in here and waste our time with solutions to problems that don't exist. Chen shifted uncomfortably. Chief, Dr. Morgan has actually had some good insights about the radar correlation issues. I'm sure she has. Rodriguez's tone made it clear what he thought of civilian insights. Tell you what, Doc? Why don't you go back to your office and write us a nice report about theoretical improvements while the rest of us handle the real work? The dismissal hung in the air like a challenge. Lisa remained seated, her hands folded calmly on the desk, but her eyes had gone completely flat, the kind of stillness that preceded violence. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but carried an edge that made Chen glance between them nervously. I appreciate your concern for operational efficiency, Chief. I'll try to stay out of your way while I do my job. Rodriguez stepped closer to the desk, using his size to intimidate. Your job is to justify your consulting fee and disappear. Our job is to keep aircraft flying and pilots alive. Let's not confuse the two. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Chen looked ready to intervene. But Lisa raised a hand slightly, a gesture so subtle it was barely noticeable, but it stopped Chen cold. There was something about the movement, the controlled precision of it, that suggested capabilities beyond systems analysis. I understand your priorities, Chief, Lisa said, standing slowly. As she rose, the fabric of her blouse shifted slightly, revealing just a hint more of the black ink beneath her collar. And I respect the work you do. All I ask is the same professional courtesy. Rodriguez's eyes flicked to her neck, caught the glimpse of dark tattoo, and dismissed it without thought. Probably some meaningless civilian artwork. Professional courtesy is earned, he said. Around here, we judge people by what they've done, not what degrees they've got hanging on their wall. Lisa smiled then, but it didn't reach her eyes. I couldn't agree more. The standoff might have continued, but Rodriguez's radio crackled with a maintenance emergency that required his immediate attention. He shot one more dismissive look at Lisa before heading for the door. Chen, that maintenance system report better be on my desk by 1400. He called over his shoulder. And maybe next time, save us all some time and handle these contractor meetings yourself. The door slammed behind him with enough force to rattle the window. Chen winced and turned back to Lisa with an apologetic expression. I'm sorry about that. Rodriguez is. He's good at his job, but he's not great with people who aren't in uniform. Lisa had already sat back down, her composure completely intact. No need to apologize. I've dealt with worse. But, as she turned back to her laptop, the light caught her collar again, revealing just enough of the tattoo to show what might have been a talon or wingtip, and for just a moment, her fingers moved in a way that suggested muscle memory for weapons that weren't designed for systems integration. Chen didn't notice. She was too busy pulling up the maintenance reports that Rodriguez had demanded, muttering under her breath about difficult personalities and impossible deadlines. Neither of them saw the way Lisa's eyes had gone completely cold during the confrontation, or how her breathing had shifted into the controlled rhythm of someone preparing for combat. They didn't notice the way she'd positioned herself in the chair to have clear access to 3 different exit routes, or how her hands had moved instinctively to locations where weapons would normally be carried. The dismissive chief petty officer had no idea how close he'd come to discovering that the quiet civilian contractor was something much more dangerous than a systems analyst with a fancy degree. That revelation would come soon enough. But when it did, his blood would run cold. The afternoon briefing room buzzed with the controlled chaos of a dozen different conversations happening at once. Officers huddled over laptops, reviewing flight schedules and maintenance reports. The air was thick with coffee, steam, and the tension that came from managing complex operations on tight timelines. Lisa sat in the back corner, laptop open, officially reviewing system integration protocols. In reality, she was doing what she'd always done: watching, listening, cataloging. The flow of information in military briefings told you more about real capabilities than any technical manual ever could. Commander Harrison stood at the front of the room, working through the day's agenda with the kind of practiced efficiency that kept naval air operations running smoothly. Maintenance status update, Chief Rodriguez. Rodriguez stood, consulting his tablet with the authoritative air of someone who knew his numbers cold. 18 Hornets fully mission capable, 4 down for scheduled maintenance, 2 awaiting parts from Norfolk. Overall readiness at 73%, which is acceptable for current operational tempo. What about the avionics issues on aircraft 304? Still troubleshooting. Could be a software conflict between the targeting system and the new data link upgrade. Rodriguez's eyes found Lisa in the back of the data room. Something our consultant might want to look at, assuming she understands military avionics. The comment drew a few chuckles from the assembled officers, but Lisa didn't react. She'd heard worse, and from people who were actually dangerous. Instead, she made a note on her laptop and continued listening. Speaking of the data link upgrade, Lieutenant Commander Chen interjected, "We're seeing intermittent connectivity issues during high-stress scenarios. The system works fine in testing, but when pilots are pulling high-G maneuvers or operating in contested airspace simulations, we're getting random dropouts." Lisa looked up from her laptop. What's the failure pattern? Random, or is there a correlation with specific flight profiles? Chen checked her notes. Seems to happen most often during aggressive maneuvering. High-G turns, rapid altitude changes, that sort of thing. Buffer overflow, Lisa said quietly, but her voice carried in the suddenly quiet room. The system can't process incoming data fast enough when the aircraft is maneuvering aggressively. You need to implement predictive caching or increase the buffer size. The room went silent. Every head turned toward her, and she could feel the weight of their attention. Rodriguez's expression was somewhere between skepticism and annoyance. "That's a very specific diagnosis," Commander Harrison said carefully. "Have you seen this issue before?" Lisa met his gaze steadily. Similar problems occur in any system where data processing speed becomes the limiting factor during high-stress operations. The solution is usually software-based, which makes it relatively easy to fix once you identify the root cause. "Easy to fix," Rodriguez repeated, his tone suggesting he thought otherwise. "Lady, you're talking about avionics systems that control multi-million-dollar aircraft. There's no such thing as easy to fix when pilot lives are on the line." "I understand the stakes," Lisa replied, her voice remaining calm, despite the obvious challenge. "I'm just suggesting that the technical solution might be simpler than the operational problem it's causing." Rodriguez stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "You understand the stakes? What stakes have you ever dealt with? Missed deadlines? Budget overruns?" His voice was rising, and other officers were starting to look uncomfortable. "These pilots go into combat with this equipment. When systems fail, people die. So forgive me if I'm not impressed by theoretical solutions from someone who's never had skin in the game." The room had gone completely quiet now. All conversation stopped. Lisa remained seated, but something in her posture had changed, a subtle shifting that suggested coiled energy. When she spoke, her voice was softer than before, which somehow made it more dangerous. "You're right that system failures can be fatal," she said, "which is why it's important to fix them before they become operational problems." Rodriguez took place a step closer, his size and aggressive body language clearly intended to intimidate. "What would you know about operational problems? You've probably never been closer to combat than a war movie." Lisa stood slowly, the movement fluid and controlled. As she rose, The collar of her blouse shifted slightly, revealing more of the black ink beneath enough to show what was clearly part of a wing, with intricate detail that suggested professional artwork rather than casual decoration. "I know enough," she said quietly. Master Chief Petty Officer Williams, who'd been silent throughout the exchange, leaned forward in his chair. He was older than the others, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of decades at sea and in combat zones. His eyes had found the edge of Lisa's tattoo, and unlike the others, he was studying it with interest rather than dismissing it. "That's military ink," Williams said suddenly, his voice cutting through the tension. "What unit?" Every eye in the room shifted, between Lisa and Williams. Rodriguez looked confused, as if the question didn't make sense. Why would a civilian contractor have military tattoos? Lisa's hand moved instinctively to her collar, a gesture so quick it was almost invisible. "It's personal," she said. But Williams wasn't letting it go. He stood up, his own considerable presence matching Rodriguez's, but with an authority that came from experience rather than aggression. "That's not random artwork. I've seen enough military tattoos to recognize unit insignia when I see it." He paused, studying her more carefully. "Where'd you serve?" The question hung in the air like a live grenade. Rodriguez looked back and forth between them, clearly not understanding what was happening. Chen had gone very still, her analytical mind putting together pieces that didn't quite fit the official story. Lisa was quiet for a long moment, her expression unreadable. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight that hadn't been there before. "I can't discuss specifics. Some things are still classified." William's eyes narrowed, and he took a step closer, but not aggressively, more like someone trying to solve a puzzle. "Classified? Like special operations classified?" "I can't discuss it," Lisa repeated. But there was something in her tone, a flatness that suggested depths better left unexplored. Rodriguez was starting to look uncertain, his earlier confidence shaken by the turn in conversation. "Wait, what are you saying? She's some kind of soldier?" "She's a civilian contractor. People leave the service," Williams said without taking his eyes off Lisa. "Doesn't mean they stop being who they were." He gestured toward her collar, where more of the tattoo was visible, now clearly a wing, but with details that suggested something more specific than standard military aviation. "That's not Air Force ink. That's not Navy either." Chen leaned forward, her engineer's mind working through the implications. "Dr. Morgan, your background check showed civilian employment for the past 5 years, but before that..." She paused, accessing her tablet. "Before that, it just shows education and some consulting work. No military service listed." "Because there wouldn't be," Lisa said simply. "Some service records don't exist in databases you'd have access to." The room had gone completely silent now. The only sound, the hum of fluorescent lights, and the distant noise of aircraft operations outside. Rodriguez looked like he was starting to understand that he might have made a serious miscalculation. Williams continued studying Lisa with the intensity of someone trying to place a face from a briefing he'd attended years ago. "Black operations," he said finally. "That's why the records don't exist. That's why you know about buffer overflows in avionics systems during high-G maneuvers." He paused. "That's why you're really here." Lisa's expression didn't change, but her breathing had shifted into the controlled rhythm of someone managing stress through training rather than instinct. "I'm here to assess systems integration vulnerabilities." "Yeah," Williams said slowly. "I bet you are." He looked around the room, his gaze settling on Rodriguez. "Chief, you might want to recalibrate your approach to our consultant here." But Rodriguez wasn't ready to back down. Years of dealing with civilian contractors had built up too much institutional arrogance to disappear with a few hints and implications. "I don't care if she used to be Jane. Right now, she's a civilian getting paid to second-guess people who actually know how to do their jobs." "Rodriguez," Williams warned, his voice carrying the authority of 3 decades in the Navy. "No, I'm tired of this. Rodriguez snapped. Military service or not, she's been here 1 day, and she's already telling us how to fix our systems. I've been keeping these aircraft flying for 8 years, and I don't need some ex-whatever telling me how to do my job. Lisa had gone very still during this exchange, her eyes fixed on Rodriguez with an intensity that should have warned him to stop talking, but he was too focused on his own grievances to notice the danger signs. You want to know about operational problems? Rodriguez continued, his voice rising again. Try keeping $20 million aircraft mission ready when half your spare parts are back-ordered and the other half are diverted to whatever crisis is happening this week. Try explaining to pilots why their targeting systems are glitchy when they're heading into harm's way. Try doing that for years, while consultants come and go with their theories and their reports that nobody reads. He took another step toward Lisa, close enough now that the size difference was obvious and intimidating. So, excuse me if I'm not impressed by your mysterious background and your classified service record. Actions matter. Results matter. And until you prove you can actually help instead of just criticize, you're just another civilian wasting our time. Lisa looked up at him. She had to, given the height difference, but there was nothing submissive about her posture. If anything, she looked like a predator, calculating distances and angles. You're right about actions mattering, she said quietly. And you're right that results matter. Rodriguez smiled, thinking he'd won the argument. Glad we understand each other. I don't think we do, Lisa replied. And something in her voice made Master Chief Williams take a step back, his hand moving instinctively toward his radio. Because he'd heard that tone before, in places where the wrong word could start a war or end a life, and he was beginning to suspect that their quiet civilian contractor wasn't just someone who used to serve. She was someone who'd served in places that didn't officially exist, doing things that never made it into after-action reports. The kind of person you really didn't want to underestimate. Rodriguez was about to find out just how expensive that mistake could be. The confrontation was building towards something that would change everything in that room. But before it could explode, Lisa's phone buzzed with an incoming text message that would redirect the entire course of events. A message that contained 2 words that would make her blood run cold. SPECTRE activated. The text message appeared on Lisa's phone screen for exactly 3 seconds before she deleted it. 2 words that meant everything had changed. SPECTRE activated. She glanced around the briefing room, where Rodriguez was still posturing and the other officers were watching the confrontation with uncomfortable fascination. None of them had noticed her phone, or the way her entire body language had shifted from defensive to predatory in the space of a heartbeat. Excuse me, she said quietly, stepping back from Rodriguez and moving toward the door. I need to take this. We're not finished here, Rodriguez called after her. But Lisa was already gone, moving down the hallway with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested urgent business. She found an empty conference room and locked the door behind her, then pulled out a different phone, one that hadn't been in her purse during the security screening that morning. The display showed 17 missed calls from a number that didn't officially exist. Lisa dialed, and the call was answered before the first ring finished. Phoenix, where the hell have you been? The voice belonged to Colonel Marcus Webb, her former handler and current nightmare. We've been trying to reach you for 6 hours. I'm undercover, Lisa replied, her voice taking on the crisp efficiency that had once been second nature. Deep cover. What's the situation? Blown. Completely blown. Our asset in Tehran went dark 48 hours ago, and signals intelligence picked up chatter about a SPECTRE operative working U.S. Navy installations. They know you're here, Phoenix. They know what you're doing. Lisa felt ice settle in her stomach. The cover identity she'd spent 5 years building, the quiet life as a systems consultant, the careful distance from anything that could connect her to her past, all of it was crumbling in real time. How blown? She asked, though she already knew the answer wouldn't be good. Satellite imagery shows 3 vehicles with Iranian diplomatic plates entered the Norfolk area this morning. Our facial recognition algorithms flagged 2 known Quds Force operatives at Reagan National yesterday. They're not here for the tourist attractions. Through the conference room window, Lisa could see the flight line where F-18 Hornets sat in neat rows. Sitting targets. If someone wanted to make a statement about American military capabilities, her mind was already calculating blast radii and defensive positions. What's the target? You are, Webb said bluntly. But they're not just here to kill you. Intelligence suggests they're planning to use you as a demonstration. Show the world that even America's most classified operators aren't safe. They want to expose SPECTRE. Phoenix, they want to prove that your entire unit can be hunted down and eliminated. Lisa closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 5 years of careful invisibility evaporating like morning mist. Timeline? Unknown. Could be hours, could be days, but they're here, and they're hunting. You need to extract immediately. Negative. The word was out before Lisa had consciously decided to say it. I can't leave. Phoenix. This isn't a request. This is a direct order from I can't leave, Lisa repeated, her voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that had once commanded teams in places where failure meant death. There are 3,000 personnel on this base, including civilians. If they're planning a demonstration, they'll want maximum impact. Extracting me won't stop the operation. It'll just change the target. Webb was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, again, his voice carried the weariness of someone who'd been fighting this kind of war for too long. Phoenix, you're one operator against unknown numbers of hostiles on their chosen battlefield. You can't protect the entire base. I can try. That's not your mission anymore. You're a civilian now, remember? Dr. Lisa Morgan, Systems Integration Specialist. No weapons, no backup, no authority to act. Through the window, Lisa watched a group of young sailors walking across the tarmac, laughing about something one of them had said. They looked like kids because that's what they were. Kids who'd volunteered to serve their country and had no idea they might be walking into a trap. My mission is whatever I decide it is, she said finally. And I decide these people are worth protecting. Phoenix. Don't call me Phoenix, Lisa interrupted. Not anymore. Phoenix was a ghost, a legend, a nightmare that kept bad people awake at night. Dr. Lisa Morgan is a real person with real responsibilities. And right now, those responsibilities include keeping this base secure. She ended the call and powered down the phone, then sat quietly for a moment in the empty conference room. Outside, normal military life continued: aircraft maintenance, training exercises, the endless routine that kept America's defenses sharp. None of them knew that somewhere in the Norfolk area, people were planning to turn their workplace into a killing field. Lisa stood up and straightened her blouse, checking her appearance in the darkened window. She looked exactly like what she was supposed to be, a middle-aged civilian contractor with a technical background and no particular physical capabilities. The perfect cover. What she needed now was to maintain that cover while somehow protecting 3,000 people from an unknown threat with an unknown timeline. It was impossible, tactically unsound, and probably suicidal. It was exactly the kind of mission SPECTRE had trained her for. Lisa unlocked the conference room door and headed back toward the briefing room, where Rodriguez was probably still holding court about the incompetence of civilian contractors. She had work to do, and not much time to do it. The first priority was intelligence gathering, figuring out how the hostiles planned to infiltrate the base and where they would strike. The second priority was establishing defensive positions and escape routes without arousing suspicion. The third priority was somehow convincing a hostile chief petty officer and a skeptical command structure to take security measures without being able to explain why. As she walked down the hallway, Lisa's mind was already working through tactical scenarios and resource allocation. She moved like Dr. Morgan, professional, unhurried, slightly distracted by technical problems. But underneath the civilian exterior, Phoenix was awakening from 5 years of dormancy, and Phoenix had never lost a mission. The briefing room was still tense when Lisa returned, but the focus had shifted to operational concerns rather than personality conflicts. Rodriguez was at the front of the room now, explaining maintenance schedules to Commander Harrison while the other officers took notes. Lisa slipped back to her seat in the corner, opening her laptop and appearing to review technical specifications. In reality, she was studying the room's layout, cataloging potential weapons, and calculating sightlines for anyone who might want to cause maximum casualties. Avionics upgrade will be complete by Thursday, Rodriguez was saying, but we'll need to run full systems checks before certifying the aircraft for flight operations. What about the data link issues? Harrison asked. Still working on that. Our consultant had some ideas, but Rodriguez's eyes found Lisa in the back of the room. Well, we'll see if theory matches reality. Lisa looked up from her laptop. Actually, I'd like to propose a different approach to the FEE testing protocol. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The room went quiet again, all attention focused on her. Rodriguez's expression suggested he was preparing for another round of civilian expertise he didn't want to hear. The current plan calls for static testing, followed by low-speed taxi tests, then flight trials, Lisa continued. But if we're dealing with buffer overflow issues during high-stress operations, we need to test under stress conditions from the beginning. You want us to stress test multi-million-dollar aircraft based on your theory about buffer overflows? Rodriguez's tone was skeptical. I want you to identify potential failure modes before they become operational problems, Lisa replied. The best way to do that is controlled stress testing in a secure environment. Commander Harrison leaned forward. What kind of stress testing are you proposing? Lisa stood up, moving to the front of the room with the kind of confident authority that made officers automatically pay attention. As she moved, her blouse shifted again, revealing more of the intricate tattoo enough for Master Chief Williams to see what was clearly a talon gripping something that might have been a lightning bolt. Rapid sequence testing, she said, turning to face the room. Multiple aircraft, multiple systems, maximum operational tempo. Push everything to its limits and see what breaks. That's... Chen paused, thinking through the implications. That's actually not a bad idea. If we're going to have system failures, better to find them during testing than during actual operations. Rodriguez shook his head. And if something goes wrong during this stress testing? If we damage aircraft or injure personnel because we're pushing systems beyond their design parameters? Lisa met his gaze steadily. Then we'll have identified a vulnerability before it killed someone in combat. The room was quiet as officers considered the proposal. It was aggressive, potentially risky, but it had a certain military logic that appealed to people who understood that training needed to be harder than combat. Williams spoke up from the back of the room. How would this testing protocol differ from standard operational tempo? Higher intensity, compressed timeline, multiple stressors applied simultaneously. Lisa replied, instead of testing one system at a time under ideal conditions, we test everything at once under worst-case scenarios. And you think this will reveal the data link problems? I think this will reveal any problems that might surface under combat conditions. The data link issues are just one potential failure mode. Harrison was nodding slowly. It's unconventional, but it makes sense. If our systems can't handle high-stress testing, they certainly can't handle combat operations. Rodriguez was still skeptical. This kind of testing requires additional safety protocols, expanded medical coverage, and probably authorization from Norfolk. You're talking about a major undertaking based on theoretical vulnerabilities. I'm talking about identifying real-world failure modes before they become fatal flaws, Lisa corrected. Her voice had taken on an edge that made several officers sit up straighter. Every system has vulnerabilities. The question is whether you find them during testing or during combat. Williams was studying her with increasing interest. You talk like someone who's seen what happens when systems fail in combat. Lisa paused for just a moment, a hesitation so brief it was barely noticeable. "I've read the after-action reports." But Williams wasn't buying it. Neither was Chen, whose analytical mind was putting together pieces that didn't quite fit. A civilian contractor who understood avionics buffer overflows, who proposed military-style stress testing, who carried herself like someone accustomed to command authority. The pieces were starting to form a picture that didn't match Dr. Morgan's official background. Rodriguez, however, was focused on practical concerns rather than mysterious backgrounds. "Even if I agreed with this testing protocol, which I'm not saying I do, we don't have the authorization or resources for that kind of operation." Lisa smiled then, but it wasn't the polite expression of a civilian contractor. It was the kind of smile that suggested capabilities beyond what appeared on any resume. "What if authorization and resources weren't a problem?" she asked quietly. "Then I'd wonder who you really are," Rodriguez replied. "Because civilian consultants don't have the kind of pull needed to authorize major changes to naval aviation operations." The question hung in the air like a challenge. Every eye in the room was on Lisa now, waiting to see how she would respond. She could maintain her cover, back down, continue playing the role of helpful consultant, or she could do what needed to be done to protect 3,000 people from a threat they didn't know was coming. Lisa reached up and unbuttoned the top button of her blouse. The single button made all the difference. With her collar loosened, the full scope of the tattoo became visible for the first time. A black hawk in full flight, wings spread wide, talons extended, gripping a lightning bolt that seemed to crackle with electric energy. But it was the small details that made Master Chief Williams go completely still. Unit insignia, barely visible unless you knew what to look for. Numbers that corresponded to classified operations. And beneath it all, in precise lettering so small it was almost illegible, SPECTRE 6. Williams' face went white. He knew that designation, had seen it in briefings that required clearances most people would never have. SPECTRE wasn't just special operations, it was the unit that didn't exist, the one that handled problems too sensitive for official acknowledgement. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. Every head in the room turned toward him, confusion evident on most faces. Rodriguez looked annoyed at the interruption. Chen looked puzzled, and Commander Harrison looked like he was trying to figure out what he'd missed. But Lisa was watching Williams with the kind of focused attention that confirmed his growing suspicion. When she spoke, her voice was different, not the measured tones of Dr. Morgan, but something with more authority, more danger. "Master Chief, is there something you'd like to share with the group?" Williams stared at her for a long moment, his mind racing through implications and possibilities. "That tattoo," he said finally. "I've seen that designation before." "Have you?" Lisa's tone was neutral, giving nothing away. "In briefings, classified briefings about operations that never officially happened." Williams' voice was gaining strength as certainty replaced suspicion. "SPECTRE 6. Phoenix." The name hit the room like a physical blow. Several officers looked confused, but a few, the senior ones, the ones with high-level clearances, suddenly understood why Master Chief Williams had gone pale. Phoenix wasn't just a call sign. It was a legend. Commander Harrison leaned forward, his expression intense. "Master Chief, are you saying?" "I'm saying our civilian consultant might not be as civilian as her paperwork suggests," Williams interrupted. His eyes never left Lisa's face. Phoenix was the operative who eliminated the entire Caracas cell in 2018. 12 targets, 0 witnesses, no official acknowledgement. "That's a hell of an accusation," Rodriguez said, but his earlier hostility was fading, replaced by uncertainty. Lisa remained perfectly still, letting them work through the implications. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the kind of quiet authority that had once commanded teams in places that didn't appear on any map. "SPECTRE operations are classified above your clearance level," she said simply. It wasn't a confirmation, but it wasn't a denial either. And the way she said it, with the casual authority of someone accustomed to discussing state secrets, left no doubt in anyone's mind about who they were really dealing with. Chen's engineering mind was rapidly processing new information. "Dr. Morgan, your background in systems integration is real," Lisa confirmed. "I have a PhD in computer science from the University of Maryland. I have 5 years of experience as a civilian consultant. All of that is true. But incomplete," Williams said. "Necessarily incomplete." Lisa's gaze swept the room, taking in their shocked faces and rapidly recalculating posture. "Some information remains classified." Rodriguez had gone very quiet, his earlier aggression completely evaporated. "How classified?" "The kind that requires presidential authorization to declassify." The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, normal Naval Air Station operations continued, but, inside the briefing room, reality had fundamentally shifted. They weren't dealing with an annoying civilian contractor anymore. They were dealing with someone who'd operated in the darkest corners of America's shadow war. Harrison cleared his throat, his command training helping him process the situation faster than the others. "Dr. Morgan, or should I say?" "Dr. Morgan is fine," Lisa interrupted. "That's my legal name now. Has been for 5 years. Dr. Morgan," Harrison continued carefully. "If what Master Chief Williams is suggesting is accurate, then your presence here isn't coincidental." "No," Lisa agreed. "It's not." "Are we in danger?" Lisa considered the question, weighing operational security against the need to prepare them for what was coming. "There are threats to this installation that haven't been shared through normal intelligence channels." "What kind of threats?" Chen asked. "The kind that target high-value military installations to make political statements." Lisa's voice was clinical, professional, but underlying it was an edge that suggested personal involvement. "The kind that use demonstrations of force to intimidate governments." Rodriguez found his voice. "You're talking about terrorism." "I'm talking about asymmetric warfare conducted by state actors using non-attributable assets." Lisa moved to the room's whiteboard, her movements suddenly taking on the crisp efficiency of a military briefing. "The target is this installation. The timeline is immediate. The objective is maximum psychological impact." She turned to face them, and for the first time since entering the briefing room that morning, she looked like what she really was, a weapon, trained by the world's most elite military unit and aimed at America's enemies. "You wanted to know about operational problems, Chief Rodriguez? This is an operational problem." Williams leaned back in his chair, his expression a mixture of awe and concern. "Phoenix, what do you need from us?" "Information, cooperation, and the understanding that everything we discuss in this room is classified at levels that could end careers and lives if disclosed." Lisa's gaze swept the room again, making eye contact with each officer. "Are we clear?" Nods around the room. Some uncertain, others eager to help. "Good." Lisa turned back to the whiteboard. "Now let's talk about how we keep 3,000 people alive." The transformation was immediate and complete. Dr. Lisa Morgan, mild-mannered systems consultant, was gone. In her place stood someone who moved with predatory grace, spoke with unquestionable authority, and radiated the kind of controlled danger that made hardened military professionals sit up and pay attention. "First, we need to establish what we're dealing with," Lisa said, sketching a rough diagram of the base layout on the whiteboard. 3 confirmed hostiles, possibly more, state-sponsored, well-funded, with access to diplomatic cover and advanced surveillance capabilities. Commander Harrison was taking notes, his earlier skepticism replaced by the focused attention of an officer receiving a critical briefing. "How do we know they're targeting this installation specifically?" "Because I'm here," Lisa replied simply. "And they've been hunting me for 5 years." The room went quiet again as the implications sank in. Chen spoke first, her voice uncertain. "You're saying this attack is personal?" "I'm saying this attack is designed to serve multiple purposes," Lisa corrected. "Eliminate a high-value target. Demonstrate that America's most classified operators can be reached anywhere. and create maximum psychological impact through an attack on a military installation. Rodriguez leaned forward, his earlier hostility completely forgotten. What's the most likely attack vector? Lisa appreciated the professional focus. Multiple options. Direct assault is unlikely. Too much security. Too many armed personnel. Vehicle-borne explosive device would be more probable, but the checkpoint system makes approach difficult. She drew lines on the board, marking potential infiltration routes. Most likely scenario. Infiltration using forged credentials or legitimate cover identities, followed by an internal attack designed for maximum casualties and media impact. Williams studied the diagram. You're talking about people who can pass security screening and have legitimate reasons to be on base. Exactly. Contractors, delivery personnel, visiting officials, anyone whose presence wouldn't trigger additional scrutiny. Lisa turned back to the room. The question is, how do we identify them before they act? Enhanced security protocols, Harrison suggested. Additional screening, restricted access, heightened alert status. That would work if we had time and authorization, Lisa replied. But alert status changes require justification through official channels, and we can't discuss the real threat without compromising ongoing operations. Chen was working through the problem from an engineering perspective. What about the systems integration review? Could we use that as cover for enhanced security measures? Lisa paused, considering the suggestion. It was exactly the kind of creative thinking that had kept her alive in places where conventional solutions didn't exist. Expand on that thought. Well, Chen continued, gaining confidence. If we're conducting stress testing of critical systems, that would naturally require additional security protocols, restricted access to sensitive areas, enhanced personnel screening, maybe even temporary closure of certain facilities. Rodriguez paused, thinking through the implications. That's actually not bad. We could justify enhanced security as necessary for protecting classified testing procedures. Williams nodded approvingly. And it gives us legitimate reasons to question anyone whose presence doesn't fit standard operational patterns. Lisa felt a flicker of professional pride. They were adapting quickly, thinking tactically, working the problem instead of just reacting to it. Good. That gives us cover for defensive measures, but we still need to identify the specific threats. She moved to a different section of the whiteboard, sketching what looked like an organizational chart. Standard terrorist cell structure. Operational commander, technical specialist, security element. Minimum 3 people, maximum unknown. How do we find them? Harrison asked. We make them come to us, Lisa replied, and there was something in her voice, a predatory satisfaction that made everyone in the room understand they were dealing with someone who'd played this game before and won. Explain. Lisa set down the marker and turned to face them fully. What they saw was no longer a civilian consultant, but a seasoned operator briefing her team on a high-stakes mission. They're here to kill me and make a statement. But they don't know I've identified the threat. As far as they know, I'm still Dr. Lisa Morgan, civilian systems analyst, completely unaware that I'm being hunted. Rodriguez was beginning to understand. You want to use yourself as bait. I want to control the engagement. Lisa corrected. Choose the time, place, and terms of contact. Force them to act on our timeline instead of theirs. That's incredibly dangerous, Chen protested. If you're wrong about their capabilities or timeline, then people die anyway, Lisa interrupted. But if we let them choose when and how to act, many more people die. This way, we have some control over the situation. Williams was studying the base diagram she'd drawn, his experienced eye cataloging defensive positions and fields of fire. What kind of support do you need? Information. Primarily, access to security camera feeds, personnel records for anyone who's accessed the base in the last 48 hours, and a quiet place to work without attracting attention. I can get you camera access, Harrison said. Personnel records might take longer. Those require authorization from Norfolk. Then we start with what we have. Lisa moved back to the whiteboard, but instead of writing, she stood quietly for a moment, thinking through the tactical situation. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of experience earned in places where mistakes were measured in body counts. There's something else you need to understand. These aren't criminals or conventional terrorists. They're state-sponsored operatives with advanced training and sophisticated equipment. They won't hesitate to kill anyone who gets in their way. She looked around the room, meeting each officer's eyes in turn. If this goes bad, if they decide to expand their target list, they won't distinguish between military personnel and civilians. Everyone on this base becomes a potential casualty. The sobering thought hung in the air. Rodriguez spoke first, his voice quiet but determined. "What do you need us to do?" Lisa felt a familiar surge of professional satisfaction. They were committed now, ready to follow her lead despite the risks involved. It was the kind of trust that had to be earned, usually through shared danger and proven competence. First, we implement the enhanced security protocols under cover of the system's testing. Second, we establish communication procedures that don't rely on official channels. Third, we prepare for the possibility that this situation will escalate beyond what any of us can handle alone. "Escalate how?" Chen asked. Lisa's expression went flat, revealing something cold and predatory beneath the professional exterior. "If they're willing to attack a U.S. naval installation to get to me, they're prepared for significant collateral damage, which means we need to be prepared to stop them by any means necessary." Williams understood what she wasn't saying. "You're talking about lethal force. I'm talking about protecting American servicemen and women from foreign operatives who are planning to turn this base into a war zone." Lisa's voice carried absolute conviction. "Whatever authorization we need, we'll get later. Right now, we focus on keeping people alive." Harrison nodded slowly. "Command authority taking over. What's our next step?" Lisa checked her watch, a gesture that seemed casual but was actually confirming the time against her mental timeline of when the threat might materialize. "We start the enhanced security protocols immediately. Use the stress testing as justification for restricting access to critical areas. I need a secure workspace and access to surveillance systems." "Done," Harrison replied. "And I need to make some phone calls." Lisa continued. "There are people who need to know that SPECTRE has been compromised." The room was quiet as officers absorbed the full implications of what they'd agreed to help with. They weren't just supporting a security enhancement anymore. They were part of a classified operation that could have international repercussions. Rodriguez stood up, his earlier antagonism completely replaced by professional respect. "Dr. Morgan, ma'am, I owe you an apology. I had no idea." "You had no way of knowing," Lisa interrupted. "And frankly, that's the way it's supposed to work. But Chief, I need you to understand something. What happened in this room, what you learned about my background, what we're planning to do, none of it can leave this room. Not until this is over." "Understood, ma'am." Lisa smiled then, the first genuinely warm expression she'd shown all day. "And Chief, when this is over, you can go back to calling me a pain-in-the-ass civilian contractor. I won't take it personally." The tension in the room broke slightly, replaced by the kind of dark humor that helped military personnel cope with dangerous situations. But underneath the momentary levity, everyone understood the stakes involved. They were about to go to war, on their own base, against enemies who'd already demonstrated they were willing to kill anyone who stood in their way. The quiet systems analyst who'd walked into their briefing that morning was now their commander in a battle none of them had expected to fight. And as Master Chief Williams looked at the tactical diagram on the whiteboard, he couldn't help but think that the enemy had made a critical error in targeting Phoenix. They'd brought a fight to someone who'd never lost one. 2 hours later, the base had transformed into something that looked like routine enhanced security, but felt like a fortress preparing for siege. The stress testing protocol had been approved through expedited channels, Lisa's phone calls had apparently carried more weight than any civilian contractor should have possessed. Chief Rodriguez supervised the implementation with the kind of focused efficiency that came from finally understanding the stakes. Access points were restricted, additional security personnel were stationed at critical facilities, and every vehicle entering the base received thorough inspection under the guise of protecting sensitive testing equipment. Lisa worked from a secure conference room in the administration building, surrounded by multiple computer screens showing feeds from security cameras across the installation. She moved between displays with practiced efficiency, cataloging faces, tracking movement patterns, looking for anything that didn't belong. Master Chief Williams entered without knocking, carrying a tablet and wearing the grim expression of someone who'd found exactly what he'd hoped not to find. "We got them," he said simply. Lisa looked up from the surveillance feeds. "Where?" "Parking lot C. Near the commissary. 3 males, mid-30s to early 40s. Civilian clothes. Arrived separately, but they've made contact twice in the past hour." Williams set his tablet on the conference table, showing enhanced images captured from security cameras. Lisa studied the photos with the kind of analytical attention she'd once applied to target identification in places where wrong answers got people killed. Facial recognition, 2 matches from Interpol databases. Quds Force operatives, suspected involvement in attacks on U.S. interests in Iraq and Afghanistan. Williams pulled up additional files. The third one's not in any database we can access, but his movement patterns suggest military training. Equipment? Nothing obvious, but they're not here for sightseeing. All 3 have maintained visual contact with the administration building. They know you're here. Lisa leaned back in her chair, thinking through tactical options. 3 confirmed hostiles, unknown additional support, on a base with 3,000 potential hostages. The math wasn't encouraging. Timeline for action? Unknown. But they've been conducting surveillance for 6 hours. Either they're waiting for additional assets or they're planning to move soon. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Commander Harrison entered, followed by Chen and Rodriguez. All 3 looked like officers who'd just received briefings that challenged their understanding of normal military operations. "Dr. Morgan," Harrison said formally, "I've received confirmation of your authorization levels from Norfolk. We're directed to provide full support for your operation." Lisa nodded, unsurprised. When SPECTRE made requests, they got approved quickly and without questions. Status of the enhanced security protocols? Fully implemented, Rodriguez reported. All non-essential personnel have been relocated to secured areas. Critical facilities are under armed guard, and we've established fallback positions in case of breach. Good. Lisa stood up, moving to the whiteboard where she'd been mapping tactical scenarios. "We've identified 3 hostiles conducting surveillance from the commissary parking lot. They know I'm here, which means they'll act soon." Chen looked nervous. "What's the plan?" Lisa turned to face them, and what they saw was no longer Dr. Morgan, or even the revealed Phoenix. This was someone in full operational mode, thinking through problems that had life and death consequences. "We end this before it starts," she said simply. "But first, I need something from each of you." She walked to the door and engaged the security lock, then turned back to face the assembled officers. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "What I'm about to ask goes beyond normal military protocols. It involves actions that won't appear in any official report and authorization that doesn't exist in writing. Each of you has a choice. Walk away now and forget this conversation happened, or commit fully to what comes next." The room was silent, as officers considered implications they couldn't fully understand. Finally, Rodriguez spoke. "Ma'am, what do you need?" "I need you to trust me completely, follow orders without question, and understand that some actions can't be undone once they're taken." Lisa's gaze swept the room. "These people aren't here to arrest me or serve papers. They're here to kill me and anyone who gets in their way." Stopping them requires methods that don't appear in military manuals. Williams stepped forward. "Phoenix, we're with you." The use of her operational call sign was deliberate, a recognition that they weren't dealing with Dr. Morgan's problems anymore. This was Phoenix's war, and they were choosing to be part of it. "Good," Lisa replied, moving back to the tactical display. "Here's what we're going to do." For the next 20 minutes, she outlined a plan that was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its implications. They would force the hostiles to act prematurely by creating the appearance of vulnerability while actually maintaining tactical advantage. It required perfect timing, absolute trust, and the willingness to use lethal force against foreign operatives on American soil. When she finished, the room was quiet. Finally, Harrison spoke. That's essentially an assassination operation. That's a defense of American military personnel against foreign attack," Lisa corrected. "The legal justification will be sorted out later by people with much higher clearance levels than any of us." Rodriguez was studying the tactical plan with professional interest. "The timing has to be perfect. If we're off by even a few minutes, then people die," Lisa finished. "Which is why we're going to rehearse this until everyone knows their role perfectly." They spent the next hour going through the operation step by step, identifying potential failure points and developing contingency plans. By the time they finished, each officer understood exactly what was expected of them and what the consequences would be if they failed. As the sun began to set over Naval Air Station Oceana, casting long shadows across the flight line, Lisa Morgan prepared to become Phoenix one last time. The quiet life she'd built as a civilian consultant was ending, but 3,000 American military personnel would go home to their families because of it. The hostiles in parking lot C had no idea they were about to face someone who'd spent 5 years pretending to be normal while never forgetting how to be lethal. Master Chief Williams checked his watch and gave Lisa a sharp nod. "Phoenix, it's time." She straightened her shoulders, and for a moment, the years fell away. She was no longer the middle-aged consultant in business casual. She was the operator who'd earned her reputation in the darkest corners of the world's most dangerous places. "Let's go to work," she said quietly. The commissary parking lot was nearly empty at 1,900 hours. Most personnel having finished their shopping and headed home for dinner. The 3 operatives had positioned themselves with clear sight lines to the administration building while maintaining the appearance of casual conversation near their vehicles. From her position in the administration building, Lisa watched them through high-powered surveillance equipment. Professional spacing, good communication discipline, weapons concealed but accessible. They knew their business. What they didn't know was that they were being watched by someone who knew their business better. "Phoenix, we have eyes on all 3 targets." Williams' voice came through her earpiece. He was positioned on the roof of the maintenance hangar with a clear view of the parking lot. "Roger that," Lisa replied, adjusting her tactical vest beneath her civilian jacket. The transformation from consultant to operator was complete body armor, communications gear, and weapons that had never appeared on any civilian contractor's equipment list. "Rodriguez, status on the security cordon?" "All checkpoints secured, backup teams in position. If anyone else tries to enter the base, we'll know about it." The chief's voice carried professional calm, but Lisa could hear the underlying tension of someone about to participate in combat for the first time in years. Chen's voice came through the comm system from her position in the security control room. "All surveillance systems active, recording everything for the after-action review." Lisa smiled grimly. Chen was thinking like an engineer, even in the middle of a tactical operation, documenting everything for analysis later. It was exactly the kind of attention to detail that kept operations from becoming disasters. "Harrison, confirm your position." "Positioned with the reaction force in Building 6. We're ready to move if this goes sideways." Lisa took a deep breath, centering herself for what came next. In 5 minutes, she would walk into that parking lot and either end this threat or become part of it. The mathematics were simple. 3 hostiles with unknown capabilities against 1 operator with known limitations. The smart play would be to wait for backup, call in additional assets, turn this into a proper military operation with overwhelming force and official authorization. But that would take hours they didn't have and risk the lives of people who'd never signed up for this kind of war. So, instead, Phoenix was going to do what Phoenix had always done: walk into impossible situations and make them possible through superior skill, better preparation, and absolute refusal to accept failure as an option. All stations, this is Phoenix. I'm moving to contact in 60 seconds. Remember, these people are foreign operatives conducting an attack on American soil. You are authorized to use lethal force to protect yourselves and your fellow servicemen. She could hear the tension in their responses, but also determination. They understood what was at stake and what was required of them. Lisa walked to the building's main exit, pausing at the door to check her equipment one final time. Everything was secure, properly positioned, ready for immediate use. She looked exactly like Dr. Morgan, leaving work for the day, if Dr. Morgan had happened to be carrying enough concealed firepower to outfit a small military unit. As she stepped outside into the gathering dusk, Lisa felt the familiar sensation of operational focus settling over her like armor. The world sharpened into tactical clarity, threat vectors, cover positions, escape routes, fields of fire. Everything else, doubt, fear, concern for the future, faded into background noise. She walked across the parking lot with the unhurried pace of someone heading to her car after a routine day at the office. The hostiles noticed her immediately, their body language shifting from casual to alert. They began moving to intercept her path, spacing themselves for optimal tactical advantage. Lisa continued walking as if she hadn't noticed them, but her route took her toward a position that would force them to cluster together if they wanted to maintain visual contact. Basic tactical manipulation. Make your enemy move into a disadvantageous position by appearing to be vulnerable. The lead operative approached her when she was still 30 yards from her car. Mid-40s, athletic build, moving with the controlled aggression of someone accustomed to violence. He spoke with a slight accent that confirmed Master Chief Williams' identification. "Dr. Morgan? Dr. Lisa Morgan?" Lisa stopped and turned toward him with the polite attention of someone responding to an unexpected approach from a stranger. "Yes? Can I help you?" "I believe you can." The operative's English was good, but formal in the way of someone who'd learned it through training rather than conversation. "We have some questions about your work here." The other 2 operatives had moved to flank her position, cutting off potential escape routes while maintaining the appearance of casual positioning. Professional work, but not quite as subtle as they thought it was. "I'm sorry, but I'm not authorized to discuss specifics of my consulting work," Lisa replied, playing her role perfectly. "If you have questions, you'll need to contact my firm through official channels." The lead operative smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I think we can skip the official channels, Dr. Morgan. Or should I say, Phoenix?" The name hung in the air between them like a live grenade. Lisa's expression didn't change, but something subtle shifted in her posture, a barely perceptible settling that suggested coiled energy ready to be released. "I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about. My name is Lisa Morgan. I'm a systems integration consultant, and I really need to get home for dinner." "Of course you do." The operative took another step closer, now within arm's reach. "But first, we need to have a conversation about some of your previous consulting work, in places like Caracas and Tehran and Damascus." He was close enough now that Lisa could see the bulge of a concealed weapon beneath his jacket, could smell the faint scent of gun oil and nervous sweat. His associates had moved to positions that would give them clear fields of fire while minimizing the risk of hitting each other. They thought they had her trapped. "I've never been to any of those cities," Lisa said calmly. "I think you have me confused with someone else." "No confusion." The operative's hand moved toward his concealed weapon. "You are Phoenix, call sign SPECTRE 6, responsible for the elimination of 12 Iranian assets in Caracas and the destruction of the Damascus network in 2018. The accusations were specific, detailed, and completely accurate, which meant they'd done their homework and were absolutely certain about her identity. The time for pretense was over. Lisa looked directly into the operative's eyes, and what he saw there made him hesitate for just a moment. It wasn't fear or confusion. It was the flat, predatory gaze of someone evaluating the best way to kill 3 people in rapid succession. "You're right," she said quietly. "I am Phoenix." The operative smiled triumphantly and began to draw his weapon. In that case, he never finished the sentence. Lisa's hand shot out and grabbed his wrist, preventing him from clearing his holster while simultaneously pulling him off balance. Her other hand drove upward into his throat with surgical precision, crushing his windpipe and dropping him to the asphalt. The entire sequence took less than 2 seconds. The other operatives were fast, professionally trained, experienced in violence, but they were reacting to something they hadn't expected, while Lisa was executing a plan she'd rehearsed mentally dozens of times. Her concealed sidearm cleared its holster in a smooth draw that spoke of thousands of hours of practice. The first shot took the second operative center mass before he could bring his own weapon to bear. The third operative managed to get his pistol clear of concealment, but Lisa's second shot caught him in the chest and spun him around before he could acquire a target. The entire engagement lasted 8 seconds from first contact to final shot. Lisa stood in the parking lot, weapons still raised, scanning for additional threats that didn't materialize. Around her, 3 foreign operatives lay motionless on the asphalt, their mission terminated permanently. Her earpiece crackled with voices checking on her status, confirming the area was secure, requesting instructions for the aftermath. But Lisa was focused on something else entirely. 20 yards away, Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez was standing next to his vehicle, having witnessed the entire engagement. His face was pale, his eyes wide with shock, and his mouth was hanging open in disbelief. The loud, aggressive man who dismissed her as just another civilian contractor had just watched her kill 3 enemy operatives in a display of tactical proficiency that belonged in textbooks on close-quarters combat. Lisa looked at him, across the parking lot, her weapon now lowered but still in her hand. When she spoke, her voice carried easily in the evening air. "Chief Rodriguez?" He couldn't respond. He was still processing what he'd just witnessed, trying to reconcile the quiet consultant he'd antagonized with the lethal operator who'd just eliminated 3 armed hostiles with clinical efficiency. "Chief?" Lisa's voice carried the kind of authority that demanded response. Rodriguez finally found his voice. "Yes, ma'am? Are you all right?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm fine." Lisa nodded and began walking toward him, her movements returning to the controlled professionalism that had characterized every interaction since she'd arrived at the base. But Rodriguez could see the difference now: the way she moved, the way she carried herself, the predatory awareness that never shut off. As she approached, Rodriguez's military training finally kicked in. Without conscious thought, his hand moved to his brow in a salute that was crisp, precise, and held longer than regulation required. It wasn't protocol to salute a civilian. But Phoenix wasn't a civilian. "Ma'am," he said, his voice tight with emotion he couldn't quite identify. "I apologize for my earlier behavior. I had no idea, you had no way of knowing," Lisa interrupted, returning his salute with the automatic precision of someone who'd received thousands of them over the years. "And you were right about one thing, Chief." "Ma'am?" Lisa smiled then, the first genuinely warm expression he'd seen from her all day. "Actions matter. Results matter. Everything else is just paperwork." Rodriguez held his salute for another moment, then lowered his hand slowly. When he spoke again, his voice carried profound respect. "Ma'am, it has been an honor to serve with you." Lisa looked around the parking lot, where other personnel were beginning to arrive to secure the scene and handle the aftermath. Master Chief Williams was approaching from the hangar. Commander Harrison and his reaction force were emerging from Building 6, and Chen was undoubtedly coordinating with Norfolk to explain why 3 foreign operatives had just been killed on a U.S. naval installation. "The honor has been mine, Chief," Lisa replied. "All of yours." As the sun finished setting over Naval Air Station Oceana, casting the parking lot in deep purple shadows, Lisa Morgan stood among the evidence of violence that had been necessary to protect 3,000 people who would never know how close they'd come to disaster. But Chief Rodriguez would know. Master Chief Williams would know. Commander Harrison and Lieutenant Commander Chen would know. And they would never forget the day they learned that real heroes don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they just show up, do their job, and disappear back into the shadows when the work is done. The salute Rodriguez had given her wasn't just recognition of her military service or her operational capabilities. It was acknowledgement of the sacrifice she'd made, the quiet life she'd built, and would now have to leave behind because her cover was blown and her enemies would keep coming. Phoenix had won the battle, but Dr. Lisa Morgan was gone forever. 3 days later, Naval Air Station Oceana had returned to something approximating normal operations. The official story was simple. Foreign nationals had attempted to conduct espionage against sensitive military technology and had been stopped by base security personnel during the commission of their crimes. The unofficial story was more complicated, involving classified debriefings, congressional notifications, and diplomatic discussions that were happening at levels far above anyone's clearance on the base. But the personnel who'd been involved in stopping the threat understood the real story, and that understanding changed everything. Lisa sat in the same conference room where she'd first revealed her identity, but now she was surrounded by different paperwork, discharge forms, transfer orders, and classified documentation that would officially close the book on Phoenix's existence while opening new possibilities for her future. Colonel Webb had arrived from Washington that morning, bringing authorization levels that made even Commander Harrison step carefully around the conversation. He looked exactly like what he was, a career intelligence officer who'd spent too many years managing assets in places that didn't officially exist. "The cover identity is completely blown," Webb was saying, reviewing files on his tablet. "Morgan Consulting Services never existed except as a front operation, and now that it's been compromised, we can't use any of the associated documentation." Lisa nodded, unsurprised. She'd known from the moment she engaged those operatives that her carefully constructed civilian life was over. "What are my options?" "Officially, you're being discharged from your consulting contract for security reasons. Unofficially, you have 3 choices." Webb set down his tablet and looked at her directly. "Deep cover extraction, new identity, new location, complete separation from any government involvement, active duty recall to SPECTRE for ongoing operations, or something we've never tried before, which is integration into legitimate military operations with your real background and capabilities acknowledged." Webb paused. It would mean a return to active duty, but not in the shadows. Regular military service with irregular responsibilities. Lisa was quiet for a moment, thinking through implications she couldn't fully foresee. Meaning, you'd be Major Lisa Morgan, U.S. Army Special Operations, assigned to units that need someone with your particular skill set, but operating within official channels instead of outside them. A knock at the door interrupted the conversation. Master Chief Williams entered, carrying a folder and wearing the expression of someone who'd been authorized to participate in discussions above his normal clearance level. "Ma'am, Colonel, the base personnel reviews are complete." Williams set his folder on the table. "Every individual who had knowledge of the operation has been interviewed and briefed on classification requirements." "Any problems?" Webb asked. "No, sir. Actually, the opposite. Commander Harrison has submitted formal commendations for everyone involved, and Chief Rodriguez has requested permission to serve under Major Morgan's command if she returns to active duty." Lisa looked surprised. "He what?" Williams smiled. "Chief Rodriguez has apparently discovered a profound respect for officers who lead from the front instead of from behind desks. He's also learned that questioning the credentials of someone who just eliminated 3 enemy operatives is probably not a career-enhancing move. Webb was studying Lisa with the calculating attention of someone trying to determine her value as an ongoing asset. The Navy wants you, Phoenix. So does the Army, the Air Force, and about 6 different agencies I can't name in mixed company. You could write your own ticket. What do you want, Colonel? I want you to be happy, Webb replied, and for the first time in their conversation, he sounded completely sincere. You've earned the right to choose your own path, whatever that looks like. Lisa stood up and walked to the window overlooking the flight line. F-18 Hornets sat in neat rows, their pilots preparing for training missions that would keep them sharp for real combat when it was needed. Young men and women who'd volunteered to serve their country and trusted that their leadership would use their skills wisely. I spent 5 years pretending to be normal, she said finally, trying to convince myself that I could be just another civilian consultant with a regular life and ordinary problems. She turned back to face them. But normal people don't eliminate enemy operatives in parking lots. Normal people don't make the kind of decisions I made 3 days ago. Webb nodded, understanding where her thoughts were leading. Normal people also don't save 3,000 lives by putting themselves between American servicemen and foreign assassins. The question is, where do I belong now that everyone knows what I really am? Williams stepped forward, his weathered face serious but supportive. Major, you belong wherever Americans need. Protecting and conventional solutions aren't enough. You belong wherever the mission requires someone who can't be intimidated, can't be bought, and won't quit until the job is done. Lisa smiled at that, appreciating the Master Chief's directness. And you think that's the regular military? I think the regular military needs people like you more than the regular military realizes, Williams replied. I think there are threats coming that are going to require officers who understand how to fight wars that don't fit into normal parameters. Webb was reviewing his tablet again. If you're interested in the integration option, I have 3 different commands that would love to have you. Special operations units that need someone with your background for training and operational planning. Training? Teaching other operators how to think like you think, how to operate like you operate. Sharing the lessons you learned in SPECTRE with people who might face similar challenges, but without the same support structure. Lisa considered that, thinking about young operators heading into situations where the rules weren't clear and the stakes were measured in lives rather than mission reports. What would that look like, practically? Major Lisa Morgan, assigned to the Special Warfare Center and School as an instructor and operational consultant, developing training programs, conducting realistic exercises, and occasionally deploying with units that need someone with your particular expertise. Williams was nodding approvingly. That would put you where you can do the most good for the most people. And, Webb added, it would put you in a position where your experience and capabilities are assets rather than secrets that have to be hidden. Lisa walked back to the conference table and sat down, thinking through the offer. It would mean returning to the military life she'd left behind, but with acknowledgement of who she was and what she'd done. No more pretending to be a civilian consultant. No more hiding her capabilities. No more living in the shadows between 2 worlds. There's one condition, she said finally. Name it, Webb replied. The people here, Harrison, Chen, Rodriguez, Williams, they stood with me when they had every reason to walk away. If I take this position, I want them to have opportunities to work with special operations units if they're interested. They've proven they can handle classified operations and make difficult decisions under pressure. Webb was already making notes. Done. In fact, several commands have expressed interest in personnel who've been operationally tested alongside SPECTRE assets. Lisa looked around the conference room one more time, thinking about the journey that had brought her from civilian consultant to revealed operator to whatever came next. The quiet life was over. But maybe that was for the best. Maybe normal had never been the right fit for someone who'd been trained to be extraordinary. All right, Colonel. Let's see what Major Morgan can accomplish that Phoenix never could. Webb smiled and began gathering his paperwork. Welcome back to the Army. Major, your first assignment starts Monday. Master Chief Williams stood up and extended his hand to Lisa with a grin. Ma'am, it's been an honor serving with you, and I suspect it's going to be even more interesting serving under you. Lisa shook his hand, feeling a sense of completion that had been missing from her life for 5 years. Master Chief, I think you're probably right. As they filed out of the conference room, Lisa took one last look at the whiteboard where she'd mapped tactical scenarios just 3 days earlier. The diagrams had been erased, but the memory of standing in front of a group of officers and revealing who she really was would stay with her forever. She was no longer Dr. Lisa Morgan, civilian consultant. She was no longer Phoenix, the ghost who operated in shadows and officially didn't exist. She was Major Lisa Morgan, United States Army, ready to face whatever challenges came next with the support of people who knew exactly who she was and respected her for it. Outside, the sun was setting over Naval Air Station Oceana for what might be the last time in her civilian life. But it was also rising on whatever came next, and for the first time in years, Lisa was looking forward to finding out what that would be. The transformation was complete. The quiet woman who'd endured mockery and dismissal had become the acknowledged expert that young operators would learn from and veteran personnel would respect. She'd gone from hiding her capabilities to using them openly in service of her country, and somewhere in the back of her mind, she could hear Chief Rodriguez's voice from that first day, declaring that people should be judged by what they'd done rather than what degrees they had hanging on their wall. He'd been right about that. Actions did matter. Results did matter. And Major Lisa Morgan was ready to prove that every single day. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.